If you're in a high stress mode and your thoughts are adding to that because of negative thinking, getting really emotionally triggered from whatever stress, then you're creating a lot of cortisol in your system. If you can just shift that to finding that balance point that the system needs when it comes to the adrenaline and the cortisol, and everything starts to rebalance out, the way to really heal and grow and continue to improve is to create a sustainable lifestyle shift. That you have to do, it's what you do every day. It's what you think every day. It's the words you use towards yourself and others every day. That's what matters most, because that's what your subconscious is programmed by. It's the repetitive daily things and how we live our life on a day-to-day basis that builds what we call our foundation.
Welcome, Dr. Theresa Bullard-White. I'm so grateful that you're here. I was just saying, I think that I manifested you. I've been warming my audience up from the world of healing to the world of spirituality and even mysticism, and how it's such a crucial part to our healing. So welcome. Before we dive into all of that, I want you to know that this podcast is all about ancient wisdom in our modern world, and ultimately how we can feel more rooted in ourselves and our life and our rituals. Can you share with us, what are 3 ways that help you feel more rooted?
Thank you, first of all, for having me on, Mona. And I love this first question. You know, this idea of being really rooted, I would think of it as being like really embodied and feeling at one with oneself. And for me, some of the real keys to being rooted are, I would say, one, just having a conscious lifestyle, right? So healthy eating, a spiritual practice, and you know, taking care of oneself, but also seeing life as an adventure. But my spiritual practice, I would say, wherever it is that I go, that's the thing that helps me recenter and really ground into wherever I am, because I travel all around the world a lot. And so, you know, I can't rely on just my home space and environment to be my grounding. It's my spiritual practice that becomes my rootedness. And then, so conscious lifestyle, that spiritual practice. And then the third thing is a really clear sense of purpose and a mission. And in that, it gives focus and it gives a sense of direction so that you know what's most important to put your energy and attention towards.
I love this already, because you haven't described actual, you know, things that you have to check off a checklist, right? You're truly embodying them. And can you just expand a little bit more? So knowing who you are based on when you're traveling, ultimately, like what I'm hearing is this concept of be here now. Was that a practice that took you a while to adopt?
You know, it's something that I, in my own search for balance and meaning and what was going to be key to my own well-being, as I was searching, like, you know, there's this point in my life where I was immersed in my PhD studies in physics, and I was starting to feel really out of balance from that immersion into science, left brain, 80 hours a week, you know, the grind, essentially. And I found myself feeling really off kilter, getting kind of dissatisfied and depressed from just the experience of being disconnected from myself. And so I started going through this systematic process in a year following of what's going to bring that balance and that meaning back to life. And I brought back in sports, and I brought back in creative hobbies and social time and all the things that you would normally think this is what creates a well-rounded lifestyle.
Right.
And you know, another year's gone by, and it's like, well, things are better, but there's still something really important missing. And then, you know, one day I was at the gym, just kind of mulling on it in the back of my head while I was doing my workout, and this little kind of light bulb turned on, and it's like, well, there's one thing you still haven't brought back in that you had previously in your life, and that was spirituality. And so from that point forward, I pursued it, and it was like, actually, this is the key. This was the key for a sense of meaning, a sense of why am I doing what I'm doing, and that it was very much about coming into deeper connection with oneself. You said the words knowing thyself, and the more in that process of that search, it unfolded, right? And it was a gradual process, I would say, finding the practice that really worked for me, finding the path that really worked for me, and then the more I did it, the more I came into my own center in who am I, what am I about, and how do I best work, what's my rhythm, you know, just finding that for myself, that became the most grounding
Yeah.
and rooting into oneself that could happen.
And did you grow up in a spiritual household or a religious household? I'm not hearing religion when you say spirituality.
Yeah. No, so I grew up with, my parents were very open, and I grew up, I would say, with a Christian influence, but my parents themselves didn't really program or impose any particular spiritual philosophy upon me or my siblings. They just allowed us to make up our own mind. But they were into the Edgar Cayce studies. My mom was into the Monroe Institute. She was into Reiki. And, so I grew up with some exposure to alternative options. But then I also had a lot of friends who were in different religious sort of orientations.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of absorbed it all and asked questions and didn't really make up my mind one way or another until it was probably in university. I was 18, 19 years old, and I started finding my first personal resonance, which was in like the transcendental poets and Zen, a bit of Zen and Taoism, and some of these kinds of things. And that really spoke to me. And once I started finding my personal resonance, I pursued it further. And so my mom, would help kind of say, well, if you like that, you might like this, and just point me in the right direction. But she just always waited for me to ask the questions.
Beautiful. It takes a lot of faith to do that, right? To really understand a part of you that's missing. For me, something that I realized is because my upbringing was at the ashram, doing yoga and meditation and chanting and a lot of these spiritual acts at the ashram, they were really enforced with me, almost like I had to do them. So growing up, my spirituality felt like a checklist.
Oh, yeah.
So I wasn't necessarily dropping into the spiritual aspect of it. I was like, okay, meditation, check. Breath work, check. Chanting, check. So on the flip side then, based on your story, do you recognize when you go back to an old way of being where you feel uprooted again? Do you know instantly, okay, oh, what am I not doing? I'm not in tune with my spirit. I'm not. What does it look like for you?
Well, I would say the things that would be the most uprooting for me are when I'm feeling really stressed and tired. Like, let's say I've been on the road for a long time teaching, and it's just starting to kind of have that wear and tear on the body, and needing to find that time to be able to, okay, now I got to catch up with myself. I got, so like if I'm short on sleep, that tends to uproot, and if there's a lot of stressful situations going on around, like I can always find my center, but it's about having the time and space to carve out to do that. And I think the other thing is if there's a lot of emotional dynamics happening, whether it's with me and other people or just around me with people I love, that's another thing that I would say uproot. But I love my practice because it always brings me that no matter where I am, if I can just find a little bit of carve out that time and space to just recenter in myself, it helps me then have that clarity that's needed to deal with the outer situations. And but by now, for me personally, I feel like my old ways of being are like a past life. It feels really distant because I've transformed so much through my journey and really rooted into, my way of life now.
I can feel that from you. You can tell, when someone's really embodied their practices, right? And I think obviously this is because of your profession. You're an educator and a teacher. And maybe this is a good segue to really talk about quantum healing. For me, my healing at the ashram, ultimately looking back, was around quantum healing because I ultimately had to pull back of just the feeling of my body or the power of my thoughts, the controlling nagging aspect of my thoughts into my spirit and what that felt like. And it felt like liberation. And someone introduced me to the concept of 0-point energy, where you can get yourself to a point of stillness. It's like turning down all of the noise of everything in your life to just be in stillness. And I'd never been taught that. Meditation was always about asking who I was and my purpose. So with that said, I know that you've built an amazing career at this intersection between science and spirituality. What led you to combine those quantum principles with your education?
That's a great question. So yeah, let me see. Where do I start with that? So I was in physics and pursuing my PhD, and I had been planning to just well, I actually didn't know what I wanted to do with it. I just knew I wanted to go as far as I had to go with my education to not hit a glass ceiling as a woman. That was my motivator.
Wow.
And I knew I didn't want to become a professor at a university, and I didn't want to teach physics. So I knew what I didn't want, but I didn't know exactly how I wanted to apply the degree.
Yeah.
I thought maybe I'll go into corporate, or maybe I'll go into a national lab and be a research scientist, or somehow apply the skill set in a corporate type setting, like analysis, or, I don't know, money markets or something like that. And, but, I was still trying to find it. And when I started my personal search for meaning and well-being and joy in life again, and that led me to spirituality, and I got so excited about it. And as I was reading and exploring, it's like anything I'm going to pursue spiritually can't negate what I know to be true scientifically. So they have to at least, I can't go with just blind faith and religious dogma. It's like I have to find something that helps the two, be able to coexist, and even better is if they can complement each other and merge. So I started researching everything into science and spirituality, science and consciousness, and it just really lit a fire in me. And I got super passionate about it. And then as I was sort of taking further steps in my own growth, and I actually had something called a life activation, which was my first connection into the modern mystery school tradition, which I ultimately really dove into pretty deeply. That life activation, it was 4 months after that I was able to finally put the pieces together and go, I have this passion for metaphysics and spirituality and ancient wisdom, and I have this passion and this, interest and this capability in the scientific. Maybe I'm supposed to bridge the two together. And I also saw at a very practical level that in the world of science, it's driven by money, meaning what research funding you can get. That's what determines what research gets done. And I also saw that things were advancing very fast technologically, but our wisdom wasn't keeping up.
Absolutely. We're losing it.
Yes. So we're getting a lot of knowledge and a lot of technology and power from that, but the wisdom is like further and further away. So I saw like, wow, we really need some wisdom and higher principles to come back in and guide. I mean, the technology is great, but we got to use it towards the good of the whole, rather than just towards, weaponry or the good of the few, or, kind of just the scientific advancement for the sake of itself. So that really led me to thinking, okay, we need more people, next generation people out there who are really wanting to bridge these two worlds.
Do you think that we're stuck in this Newtonian concept? We talked a bit before the show, this like Newtonian way of life and believing that like we're waiting to see the science and the data, we're waiting till something's proven to try it, instead of awakening the knowing that you're talking about within us?
Yeah. Definitely. This is one of the big things that I teach. And with the Quantum Learning Academy that my husband and I have co-founded, it's very much about helping people to shift to a quantum mindset. But we got to understand where we're coming from, right? So the Newtonian mindset is several hundred years old, like let's say, 300-400 years old. And it's very much what drove the Industrial Revolution, the scientific age, but it's very much coming from reductionism, separatism, materialism, and determinism. Like everything's controllable, everything should be knowable, everything should be predictable, and we're separate, and everything's materially real. And rationalism rules in that kind of mindset. But when you look at from the quantum physics perspective, quantum physics has been around for over 100 years. However, the mindset of it, the principles of it haven't been, I would say more recently, they're starting to get picked up in kind of as a mindset applied more broadly, but it's taken a lot longer for people to embrace it because it's so different from our practical 3D world view that we've been building society on for the last 400 years. And they also turn the old quantum principles on their head. So it's almost like the opposite at the deeper reality. But now we're in a phase of human evolution where the Newtonian mindset isn't keeping up with the pace of change.
Wow.
And it's like creaking at the seams when you're trying to control things, the old paradigm way of doing it. And meanwhile, there's this this whole new paradigm way of living and building our society that's upon us now. But human mindset still it's stuck in the old way of viewing things, and we need to shift into more of a quantum mindset.
It's that exact shift when I'm working with my clients. That's probably the hardest thing, right? So I had shared, people listening, if you're stuck looking for the protocol, the guru, the diet, the supplement protocol, the medication to fix things, it's almost like a process of peeling back layers to really understand. And I think we are, you talk a lot about this awakening that's happening right now. We're catching on, like the system's kind of broken. I'm doing all the things and I'm not feeling better. Right. I'm understanding these concepts that I'm being told I should do and follow, and yet I still don't feel well, right?
Yeah.
And, blessing or curse, I would say that my journey of getting to, feeling broken, to go down that path of healing, it was like peeling back layers of myself that I had to literally believe that parts of myself weren't real anymore or true. It's like, I don't have to be that way. And who decided that I had to be that way anyways? And when did I decide to give into diet culture? And who said that I still have to do that? Right?
Exactly.
And just taking ownership. And as a woman, there's this deep intuition that really comes up within us that I think a lot of people now are starting to wanting to dabble in a little bit more. Are you noticing that with the people that you work with and your students?
I see more and more people waking up. I see more and more people seeking alternatives. I mean, even just the fact that something like yoga and meditation practices 20 years ago were woo-woo, and today they're mainstream, right? All that already shows that there's an awakening happening worldwide, at least in more first world countries, you see this. And, but, I think that journey that you went through, and I went through a similar process where you have to kind of peel back the layers of programming from whether it's cultural programming, academic programming, the media, and the advertising you've been exposed to, whatever, expert or guru on this thing or that thing, whatever they say is like the thing. You got to peel back all those layers and find out, who am I and what works for me?
Yeah.
It's all about knowing thyself.
Absolutely. And I feel like amongst many spiritual teachings, there's this understanding that the physical body is not the emotional body. The emotional body isn't the spiritual body. So you can separate those things. So in your journey, did you feel like your physical body was a manifestation of those Newtonian concepts that you were practicing, or when you're out of alignment? Like, did you see the inflammation? Did you take that as a sign of a deeper calling than just changing your diet?
So for me, it was very much, I think a part of what drove me to seeking alternative solutions was that I, from a young age, like from 12, 13 years old, had been diagnosed with scoliosis. But I didn't want to let that define me, right? So I remember the allopathic approach was going to be, well, you can have surgery and have a rod stuck up your spine, or you can not do that, and you'll grow to be an old hunchback old woman. And I just thought, neither of those options work for me. Thank you very much. And I'm going to pursue alternative solutions. So that drove me to seeking like chiropractic and body work and acupuncture and massage and all these kinds of things. And I was just like, I'm going to be an athlete. And I really worked on my physical side, and I did. I went to University of Denver on a volleyball scholarship, and I continued to play up until I had a really bad knee injury. And that was like 25. There was a big shifting point for me. But I knew from a really early age, just from a physical place, that alternative modalities, things like Reiki, like I would often get headaches and my mom would do Reiki on me, and the Reiki would be more effective than the Advil.
Wow.
And so I knew there's a physical component to things, but I also knew there was an energetic component to things. And I found more healing and growth through the holistic approach than I ever did through the allopathic approach, and to the point where it's like, okay, I see that there's a place for allopathic medicine when it's acute, and you have an injury, you have like a break, like you break a bone, or there's a heart attack. It serves its place. But then when it comes to more chronic things and things that are are an ongoing maintenance that needs to happen, I think that that's where the holistic approach really thrives. And then down the line, the further I went down the line, the more I started to realize that as I healed emotionally, chronic issues in my body just all of a sudden disappeared. They just let go.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of mind, body, somatic healing work. And then the more I got into the spiritual and the knowing thyself as a spiritual being, the less I allowed the physical to define or to be the impediment. Just learned to really work at a much higher level. And I think it even became like a bit of a fountain of youth, like the more I awakened at the energetic level and had more positive thoughts and shifted, and let go of old emotional baggage, it was like I started looking younger, even though I was growing older.
Yeah. Oh, I believe it. This is where I hope that this awakening to and returning to ancient wisdom really comes back, because right now I think that there's still this lens of like meditation seems like hard work. Breath work seems like hard work. Booking yourself into a Reiki session takes commitment and time, instead of thinking about like the beautiful symphony that it could like align your body with, right? And that's kind of how I describe quantum. It's this attuning, right? At the ashram, through whether it was yoga or breath work or chanting or being in nature or lying down or resting or studying, it's like different parts of like a tuning fork, right? That we're tuning every single cell in my body. And that was the awakening that I need. Like, oh, I actually don't have to go looking for something outside of myself. It's within.
Right.
Just like you.
Yeah, definitely.
So for listeners who are new to this concept then of quantum healing, how could you describe something in a tangible way to help them understand, like, if you've experienced this, maybe it's a time for you to look at quantum healing in this light?
So I think, when we feel really disresonant, disharmonious, like we're feeling out of balance, things feel stressful or tense, or, these are times where we have to realize, if you want to use this concept of tuning, which I think is a great, metaphor, because the same principles that apply to sound and resonance and harmonics and beauty musically, we can apply those same concepts of harmony and musicality, if you will, in the body.
Right.
And when we're feeling, in a disharmonious state, that can lead to disease. And if we're having it manifest at a disease level, it means we've ignored it for a long time, usually. And that then there's got to be a journey to, to bringing oneself back to harmony, because the body itself is so incredible in its ability to heal itself if we just give it the right conditions.
Yes. Yeah.
And bringing oneself into what I call, from a quantum perspective, coherence. Coherence is kind of like laser-like, meaning everything's getting tuned into the same frequency. It's all moving in the same direction. It's all in phase and in step with each other. That coherence is really, really key to really being able to access quantum potentials. So you mentioned stillness earlier, right? Stillness is the first step to being able to access and kind of open up the door to the quantum possibilities. But then we need to have real coherence at all levels of our being, right? At our spiritual levels, at our mental levels, our emotional levels, our physical levels, all the chakras, everything within us, our whole being needs to be in this coherent state, so that when we then go into the quantum, we can plant the seed or direct the intention of what it is we want to manifest out, because the quantum field has infinite potential.
Right.
You can't, one of the complaints I would have about like law of attraction stuff, for example, is that people, they're calling it quantum, but it's not really quantum, because they're just using affirmation and positive intent, and that's great. But if they might at a conscious level be intending one thing, but at a subconscious level, they're sabotaging it, right? So their whole being isn't aligned. And so they're actually giving mixed messages into the quantum field, and they're going to get mixed results because of that. So a lot of the training that we're doing with people with the Quantum Learning Academy and our iQuantum event is, how do we really come into that whole being coherence? How do we also access the quantum, right? What are the keys to that? What are the core principles, so that we really understand the deeper workings of the quantum nature, as opposed to just trying to hack it for a quick fix. It doesn't really work that way. So there is a building up, there is a shift that needs to happen, and that's not an overnight process.
Oh, yeah. So, for people who have done affirmations, I am strong, I am happy, I am rich, these are all thoughts within the brain when the cells within the body could believe something completely different, right? So, do you have thoughts right now on, there's a trend that's happening on emotional trauma release? And a lot of people are going out into the world and facilitating these emotional trauma release sessions and sending people out on their way. When from you and I, from our experience, like, it's been a journey with lots of guidance and commitment and, commitment to go back to that coherence. Do you think that it's that easy for people?
No, I think the problem with a lot of these fads, if I can call them that, and this goes for the emotional trauma release stuff. It also goes for the let's go have our psychedelic experience. It goes for all, you go into this immersive experience and you might have a great time in the moment, but you don't necessarily come home with the tools to integrate it and sustain it in your life. You don't necessarily come home with the empowerment to know what to do for yourself. And I mean, trauma release, if you're going in and you're just pulling up the emotion and expressing it, sometimes that might have its place, but sometimes it might re-traumatize.
Absolutely.
You're just reinforcing the memory and reliving it, and then your brain actually can't tell the difference between what is imagined and what is physically happening. And so every time you're kind of reliving that, you're re-traumatizing it in a way. So in many ways, I think some of these fads can be very counterproductive. And it is the way to really heal and grow and continue to improve is to create a sustainable lifestyle shift. That you have to do, it's what you do every day. It's what you think every day. It's the words you use toward yourself and others every day. That's what matters most, because that's what your subconscious is programmed by. It's the repetitive daily things and how we live our life on a day-to-day basis that builds what we call our foundation. And we call this in the mystery school tradition and in Kabbalah, we call it our foundation in life. And so it's in thought, word, and deed, day by day. And that determines the strength of the ground we stand upon within ourself. You talk about being rooted. That is where you're standing on that foundation of your own being. And if it's strong, then you can bring in new methods and techniques and build on top of that. But if you have cracks in it and it's weak and you can't sustain it for yourself, then you can try and bring in the next latest greatest, but it's not going to integrate. And so these sort of fads are where people, I think, they might have a high in the moment, from the experience of it. They might feel that elation and that cathartic kind of release, but can they go and sustain in their life?
Absolutely. It's almost like looking for another fad or protocol. It ultimately is, right? It might be based on holistic values or somebody who has a very strong holistic or spiritual practice, but that does not mean that the same results are going to relate for you. It's a journey of practice, right?
It is. Yeah, it's a way of life.
A way of life. And yet here we are. So for the people who do have the brain, who want the facts and the belief, we have epigenetics, right? So tell us about epigenetics and the power of our thoughts and our mindset and our belief system and how we can change our DNA, but also how it does come with shifting our beliefs.
So in your DNA, you have a couple layers. First you have your genetic layers, and that's the genes. Those are that's the language of the DNA itself on the inside. And that's programmed. We receive that, right, from our family, essentially, from our parents. And then there's a layer above the genes, which basically are the on and off switches. This is what they call the epigenetic, above the genes layer. And that layer of the genes, the on and off switches, are receptive to their environment, their local environment, biochemically speaking. But then what affects that biochemical environment? It's everything from lifestyle choices, what you're consuming and so forth, your stress levels, but it also includes your thoughts and your attitudes and your emotional levels.
Your environment,
everything. So the more you have a coherent environment that you're providing it and a coherent level of thought and more positive thinking, right? There's research that has shown that there's a couple things that your behavior, your lifestyle choices, your attitudes, and so forth can turn on and off the switches. And then when those switches turn on and off, not only does it shift it for you, it shifts it for your descendants as well, right? Like those epigenetic layers can continue to propagate up to 14 generations down into the future.
Yeah.
And for better or for worse, right? So if you had somebody who was an alcoholic or, they were addicted to cigarettes or whatever, 5 generations ago, that gene, or I should say that epigenetic switch that kind of creates a predisposition potentially to a similar addiction for future lines can be passed down as well. Now, everyone always has their choice as to whether they engage that or not.
Absolutely.
Right? But you can, if you shift it for yourself and you can turn it off. And that's where we have total control because, and I know that science and especially Big Pharma would like to say, well, epigenetics, yay, we can create all these drugs that will, turn your genes on or off based on the epigenetic layers. But the original study, and I think people like Bruce Lipton and Dawson Church and some of the work the Heart Math Institute has done, they've really shown from a scientific place, like actually your attitude, your thoughts, your beliefs, your who you think you are, like all of that has the powers in your hands to turn your own switches on and off.
It's so fascinating. I didn't share with you, but I work with these scientists out of Johns Hopkins who are now studying generational trauma from people who lived through the Holocaust, right? And it's fascinating. It's almost like okay, so this was given to me, but then there's the choice that can come on the back end of whether or not you choose to align with that. For me, I remember it was a decision to not identify as somebody who had a heart condition. It was a decision I'm not going to get my mom's rheumatoid arthritis, right?
Right.
It's a belief system within me that I can feel shift, like, oh, no, it's just completely disconnected. It's likely a belief system change for you around your spine and the energetics behind that, right?
Yeah.
And from that, I want people to just hear how empowering that is, that you have this wisdom to actually turn off the genetic factors that may cause you to get sick, feel bad about yourself, who might be prone to sadness or depression or anxiety, that there could be something greater at work that you have control over.
Yeah. And I think that choosing, right, is the first step. And knowing that you can choose a different belief system, knowing that you can choose to like a lot of times people wrap their identity up around their story of, oh, I'm, a victim to this, or I have this condition. And that becomes their story, and then it becomes their identity. And if you think that's who you are and what defines you, then you're always going to keep reinforcing that because that's what you put out to the world. But if you choose differently, like you chose to take your experience and it became a leverage point to say, no, this is not going to define me, right? And then it set you on a journey to finding, the healing solutions. I had the same thing. It's like, well, I'm not going to let this condition define me. Or limit me in my life, right? I'm going to choose something else. And it's not just about the belief system. I mean, it starts there. And the choice to realize that you are free to make it something different for you. But it's also the actions that you take, right? And so we put in the work to pursue the healing solution and the healing journey, and used that issue, that became the catalyst that then made us search for that healing journey. It became like a springboard or a leverage point that we then use to turn it towards a positive and pursue a positive outcome from it, rather than becoming enslaved by it.
I have this expression with my clients to help them with this path of aligning, asking yourself throughout the day if whatever your decisions are they nourishing you or are they depleting you? So it's constantly bringing you back. What a beautiful concept too, to think that just by creating coherence through your decisions, you're co-creating with quantum, right? If we're going to look at it through that lens, like you're co-creating with how your future is unfolding and the things that are brought into your path and how your body is responding just by the act of our thoughts and decisions.
Yeah, and I think the more that you take that practice of, okay, here's the thought and the intention. now I'm going to meditate and get to that stillness point, and I'm going to come to that coherence, that place of coherence. And then I'm going to inform the quantum field what I want to manifest through that. But you have to reach the right state to really have that powerful influence on the quantum. You have to become almost laser-like, piercing through, and then you can create that shift. You can create that quantum jump, if you will. And then from there, as you bring it back into your physical, like waking regular consciousness, now I have to follow through with the right actions, right? So I have to have made that core shift within myself and now start living into it and embodying it. And then we take the proper actions that are going to reinforce that. So it's a formula, you're right? It's not just the one step of belief. There's several steps, but they're simple enough to learn. But it will be a rewiring of how we live and how we, kind of interpret things and how we respond to circumstances in life and what we do with it. But I think it's the quantum mindset is a very empowering way to view challenging circumstances. Uncertainty, for example. A lot of people get, when they face something where they're looking at uncertainty, it naturally brings up a sense of fear, a bit of anxiety, hesitation, like wanting to stay in the comfort zone rather than moving forward into that uncertainty, because that's the Newtonian mindset. The Newtonian mindset is we should be able to control things, we should be able to predict things, and if you can't predict it, you should be afraid of it. Whereas the quantum mindset says, well, actually, in the uncertainty, there are infinite possibilities. So what do you choose to create? Lean into it and move towards it in a very proactive way, because quantum physics says the universe is participatory. And it's very much about the meaning you give things, the context that you create, and what you observe, what you choose to manifest through your consciousness. But if you're not in control of your consciousness, then you're not going to have as a high level, conscious participation with the quantum.
Those are two incredible words I think everyone always needs reminding of: limitless possibilities. Because we often sit down, in these fads of manifestation and stuff like that. What's in our mind, they're finite thoughts. They're built on the things that we've known or seen, when there could be something so much greater unfolding. So in the Vedantic philosophy, when we sit down in meditation, there's two questions that we often ask ourselves. Who am I and what do I want? We might not ever get the answers. Chances are
they're unending.
They're unending. But from your teachings, let's just say for listeners who are, all right, they're coming onto this side of understanding. All right, let me sit with my beliefs. Do you guide them to any questions specifically in sitting in meditation?
Oh yeah. Who am I is a big one. I mean, that's the most important question somebody can ask themselves in life. And whether I'm coming from the quantum or I'm coming from ancient Western mystery school tradition, who am I is the very first question. And that, from a quantum perspective, we would say you are a quantum being. So what does that mean? Right. And what does that make you capable of? From a spiritual perspective, we would say you are an eternal being. And what does that mean? Right. And how much you're limitless. So what else, why are you limiting yourself with your belief system? And then, we then pursue further, like, what am I? And the difference would be, okay, the who is like the most basic essence, the essential eternal essence of me. And we all have a similar essence, right? At that core essence, we're all one. But the what am I is my uniqueness. What are my unique gifts? What's my unique piece to bring? And how do I uniquely express my quantum nature or my eternal? And then, knowing a bit of where we come from and where are we going? How has where we've come from informed who we are today? And then where do I want to go from here? Right? And take it even beyond this physical life, right? Don't define yourself based just on conditions of the physical life, because if you're eternal and if you're pure energy and pure intelligence, it extends far beyond this life. So we ask every single one of these questions beyond just this physical. And then another really important one is, what is my purpose? What am I really here to accomplish? That thing, if I can find that, my unique piece and mission and purpose in this life, that's where I'm going to experience my greatest joy, my greatest sense of meaning, my greatest flow of abundance.
Yeah.
It's going to be super fulfilling. So when we find that, then we're really living a rich life.
Yeah. And I feel like your sense of purpose, even though it might not hit you like with complete clarity to begin with, the more that you align with this concept of frequency, things become more apparent and relevant for you. And I use the word frequency a lot. I would love to hear how you describe it through the lens of healing. When someone's able to shift their frequency and to align even with the feeling of happiness every day, they're not going to drive through a McDonald's drive-through. They're not going to pick up, a bottle of wine, whatever your vice is, right? You're not going to do that. You're living in such alignment with this like freedom of having your note in this universe. And it's hard to always stay there, right? Being stuck living in these busy, stressful cities. How would you describe frequency then through the lens of healing?
So from a scientific perspective, frequency is the rate of vibration that, any kind of vibratory energy, which pretty much everything vibrates. Everything has this vibratory energy, these oscillations. And so the frequency is how fast or how slow is it vibrating. And from a healing perspective, when you're in emotional or physical state of depletion or depression or, unhappiness or anger or, resentment, whatever, you're going to be in a lower frequency state, right? It drags you down more towards this sort of heaviness. Whereas when you're feeling more positive experience, you're happy. I don't even want to say happy because happy is very conditional.
Fleeting.
And fleeting. I would like to say joy, which is a natural state of being. So when you're experiencing joy, when you're experiencing a sense of awe, when you're experiencing gratitude and appreciation, and you're experiencing like this wonder and this adventure of life and passion for, these are higher frequency states, and they elevate you, they uplift you, and they help you rise above whatever, mundane challenges we're dealing with, because it reconnects you with your spirit, because those are the natural state of your spirit, who you really are. And the more you can connect towards the spirit, and we don't want to transcend. I think a lot of the New Age gets into bypassing, right? So they're trying to transcend the physical and kind of ignore their physical life and the world around them, and then just chase the high or chase the bliss and stay in that bliss. And that's great. But if you can't take that beautiful state of light and love and positivity and bring it into the physical world and make a difference with it, it's not really doing you or anyone else any good. It's just bypassing. So I think we need to reach up to that higher state of frequency and fill ourselves with it. But then we need to let it inspire us into action, because we're here in a world of action, and we're here to make a positive difference in this physical world and kind of transform and transmute, do the alchemy, if you will, on the world, so that we can make it a better place to live in. And it can become a heaven on earth, if you will. It can become a life of joy for everybody, not just for a few.
And things like plant medicine and psychedelics, I really think if we look at our ancestors, they use those for insight. They might go in, get insight, and then you come back with the awareness that there's another way of being in life, where it's an opportunity for you to do deeper work, right? This is like a fear right now with medicine. Like if we're really going to go into the psychedelics world, because people want to jump back in because of course you feel the liberation of pulling back into this like terrestrial world where you feel a sense of freedom. It's not real though. You have to come back into existence.
Right. I think that in ancient times, in certain shamanic societies where these plants were used, they were used with a lot of honor. They were used in a very sacred way. The shaman or the initiate who was going to partake usually was trained for many, many years to understand the consciousness of that plant, the land. They learned to achieve a resonance and a coherence even before they would partake, right? And it was an initiatory thing, and they might do it once, and then the door should be open. They don't need it ever again.
Right.
The way it's being used today is like trying to use it as a shortcut to, again, bypass the work and the hard yards. And well, you can do that, but you're then reliant upon that substance to open the door for you, versus awakening within yourself and building up to have the ability to sustain that awakening in your life.
Yeah.
And, people can have good experiences on it, and it might bring some healing, and that's fantastic. But if you then start to make the plant the way, you're giving your power away, because really the key is inside of you.
Yeah.
You are the way, right? And it's about the inner journey, and all those answers that you seek are within you. And so, in the traditions that I've studied with, it's like we've looked at, no, everything's inside, and how do I awaken what's inside? I just need the right keys and knowledge and practices, but it's all in me. I don't need to give my power away to something outside.
Absolutely.
And then when I've built up that new neural networking, if you will, within myself, I can sustain it. It's mine. My enlightenment is mine. It's not due to somebody else or something else that's outside of me.
Absolutely. Want to hear something crazy? A girlfriend of mine, she was with a group of people with this, air quotes, shaman, to do an ayahuasca ceremony. So I went. I was never called to it, but I tried it. And what I experienced was just the sensation of remembering who I was. That's it. I've had the exact same type of experience or resonance within my body from that ceremony after I got my spiritual name at the ashram.
And through the meditation practices and chants. And,
chanting the same thing for 3 hours with a swami in a seated position in nature, silencing my mind, coming directly into my body was the exact same resonance within my body. No drugs needed at all.
Right. But the thing is that, the meditation, the hours of chanting, the discipline of it.
Discipline, you got it.
Is a part of what is needed to create that you're creating a container within yourself to sustain the new energy, to sustain the new light and awakening that comes in. And unfortunately, a lot of people just don't want to do the work.
Absolutely.
And so that's why they go for the quick shortcut, but in the process don't realize that they're giving their power away. And it's very popular, right? And everybody's talking about, oh, this is the thing to do.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there's a lot of people being misled, I think. And
I agree.
I'm sorry if that offends anyone, but if you can, and again, people can have good experiences through those, but then there's equally people who can have really terrifying experiences.
Absolutely.
And so it's just it's less controlled, and there's so many circumstances and variables that come into it. Whereas when you create a practice that becomes a way of life within, that's all about you awakening to the power within through the tools of ancient wisdom traditions, that's about your potential waking up versus something else sort of giving you a momentary glimpse.
Yeah. And I don't want to dismiss for people who've experienced that, but I think that through the work that you're done, I'm trying to shed a light on, you teach so much about expanded consciousness. And through expanding our consciousness, it kind of dissolves the intensity around what it takes to feel healthy in this world. Do you want to expand on that? Talk to us about consciousness and break that down into a simple.
Okay. So, consciousness is, like, most people think they're living their life from a very conscious place.
Yeah.
But how much they're consciously using higher mind to direct their choices and their actions in life is actually probably the tip of the iceberg. Maybe 5 to 10% of their choices and actions are actually guided by higher consciousness, or even just daily waking consciousness. A lot of it is coming from the subconscious. So, we say that the subconscious is the rest of the iceberg beneath the surface of awareness. And, so 90 to 95% of people's choices and actions and thoughts are actually rising up from subconscious. And that subconscious is it's the backlog, it's the programming, it's the habitual way of being, it's the autopilot, it's the unprocessed wounds of the past and things that they just kind of suppressed. And it's when our tolerance levels go down, or we're stressed or we're sick, that's when it, can come up and really grab hold, and you kind of get into fight flight. So to elevate your consciousness is a couple things. One, it's cleaning up what's going on in the subconscious, right? So there's a bit of a deep dive into the self and that reevaluation of what your beliefs are, what your habits and patterns have been, and what you're programmed versus what actually serves you and is by choice. And then realizing you can re-pattern your foundation and the way you live. So there's a cleaning up of the subconscious that needs to happen. That's a big part of spiritual alchemy, of transforming from ego into the higher self.
Yeah.
And then, as you start getting more and more conscious and allowing that, higher mind, that higher self to direct your choices and your actions, now we want to start looking at, okay, what's the next step beyond that even? How can I elevate my consciousness to more and more and more being one with that quantum field and accessing it on a regular basis, or one with the higher spiritual awarenesses. And there's many levels, there's many planes of consciousness that we can access and start awakening to beyond this sort of physical life awareness. And when we do, it's a source of great wisdom and great inspiration and great possibilities.
It feels like liberation, almost, right?
Yeah.
You used the word alchemy. I feel like alchemy is rooted amongst so many integrative practices. Do you agree?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Most ancient traditions and teachings that have a spiritual sort of transformational process involved with them, alchemy is actually a universal formula that even nature follows. But when we can engage with it through our consciousness and in a way where we understand the steps of the alchemical process, which is a natural kind of evolution from a lesser state to a greater state, but how we can engage with it intentionally and with the right practices to speed it up.
Right.
And so I think a lot of ancient, like you see it in Qigong, you see it in Taoism, you see it in Chinese medicine, you see it in Ayurveda, you see it in the Western alchemical tradition.
Right.
So this is definitely a universal, and each system might have their own sort of way of talking about it or going about it, but there's a lot of commonality to the stages that we go through.
And it's almost this knowingness and trust within nature, right? I've heard you talk about herbalism too, and this science studies nature, right? These modalities use nature as reflection to how we're healing, the tools that we could use to heal, right?
So in alchemy, we would say that, we have to align with natural law, and we have to understand how nature works. And then when we understand how it works, then the question is, how can we harness it?
Right.
And science has that same mindset. How can we harness nature? Where science and alchemy divorce is that science these days has gone more purely material, chemistry, biology, and it's just purely the material side of things. But where alchemy, says as well, there's also the spirit, which is really, really critical. There's the body, there's the soul, there's the spirit, and all three of them need to be harnessed and brought into perfect synergy. And they call it this, conjunction, or this crystallization of the three parts perfectly blended and balanced into one. And so in alchemy, we're saying, yes, we want to align with nature, but we also want to work with it using our creativity and our will and our ability to direct and speed up nature, right? So they say in alchemy, it's a little controversial, but they say nature unaided by man or humans fails, because nature left to its own just kind of grows wild, right? And then in its overgrown wildness, it even suffocates itself.
Right.
But when you can have human intellect and intelligence and creativity come in and work with it, then we can perfect it. And you can think of like the difference between a wild jungle versus like a Japanese garden or any garden, you know, where we've pruned and we've, you know, tended and we've, you know, watered and we've done all the different pieces to help it thrive. And that in its own way is alchemical. And so, you know, we engage with it, understanding the principles and engage with it in the right way, but we can then help it perfect. Science, well, some of the sort of industrial, I don't know about the scientific way, but the industrial way of, you know, going about the world today is not necessarily aligned with the nature, right? It's not working with it. Sometimes it's just, you know, working against or depleting. So if we can come into greater harmony again between human creativity and innovation, and then the natural way, the natural order of things, but then use it, you know, in this synergy to perfect and evolve it towards something even greater.
Absolutely. And what a beautiful concept. I really think that the future of health is going to rely on that interconnectedness with nature and going back to getting dirty again. And even nature's connection, if we think about with the gut microbiome and the heart and the brain, we see physiological changes just by being in nature amongst those three and the communication between those three, right? Do you talk a lot about the gut microbiome?
I don't talk a lot about it personally, but I've personally experienced it. In my own practice and life, it's like, oh, wow, this is so important. And it's really that, like, how do we give that microbiome the right ingredients so that it can be in a healthy kind of symbiotic state versus, you know, a overgrowth of the bad bacteria and so forth. And it makes a huge difference. And it affects your mood, it affects your health, it affects your energy levels, it affects so much. And it's very exciting, I think, that science is and medicine is moving more and more towards how do we look at this in a more holistic way? How do we understand our lifestyle choices and how they impact our health versus let's just go for the pharmaceutical Band-Aid?
Totally. Yeah. And this is where I find the joy that I get working with my clients who've experienced what you mentioned, pulling back from the egoic mind and the thoughts and the worry that are constant into more of the state of consciousness and awareness, how even something like digestive issues or issues with the gut microbiome dissipate without focusing on the dieting or even a supplement protocol to resolve those issues, right? I think it's like awakening this wisdom within us.
Well, it kind of goes back to similar themes as the epigenetics, because if you're in a high stress mode and your thoughts are, you know, adding to that because of negative thinking, and your emotions are adding to it because of, you know, you're getting really emotionally triggered from whatever stress, then you're creating a lot of cortisol in your system, which then triggers stomach acid issues, and then that triggers gut issues, and then, you know, and it creates a acidic environment, and, you know, it's just this snowball effect. And if you can just shift that to, you know, like finding that balance point that the system needs when it comes to the adrenaline and the cortisol, and everything starts to rebalance out, and then you feed your gut the right energy, whether, you know, it can be through food, but it can also just be through breath. Like breathing is so important, like proper breathing. Most people are such shallow breathers, but if you can breathe down into the gut and, you know, build that life force that's there, it will balance so much out in one system. So these ancient practices, you know, are being verified by science and medicine today, but you know, did we need them to validate? I mean, maybe in today's mindset we did, but that didn't mean they weren't working in the past, right? They were working, and now we're just rediscovering why they work.
Which is exciting. Like, if we're understanding that our body has this blueprint for healing and that could be the future. Right? So what's one small step that someone can begin to shift their consciousness to healing their body? And I'm going to go back to, you used the word activation earlier. I'm a big fan of the modern school of mystery. I feel like I keep getting drops of insight from them, which might be giving me a bigger sign. But tell us about the activation that you went through, and is that necessary to turn on consciousness to start to heal?
Is it necessary? It opens up the doors to your potential, a lot faster. So the Modern Mystery School is a worldwide organization, and they've trained practitioners all around the world, not every country, but a lot of, we're in like 55 different countries. We have practitioners who've learned this modality called the life activation. And what it's doing, there's a couple things. One, we go into the bioenergetic field, and we are balancing out several layers of that biofield. There's the elements, the four elements. There's magnetic energy. There's something we call etheric energy. There's your aura. There's your chakras. Things are getting balanced out and smoothed out. So anywhere where there've been like disharmonies, or imbalances or blockages that have come in, it just kind of gets all smoothed out, like giving your car a tune-up. Everything gets like back to the proper hum. And then once everything's in that nice balanced state, we go into what is called the etheric body. Now, the etheric is like the blueprint, the energetic blueprint that the physical is built around, or it's almost like this energetic. Almost like the myofascial system, but at an energetic level. And it holds the blueprints for our physical. And when we can go in there, we light up the potentials. We turn on the switches, if you will, that get plugged back into the light and the original source of energy and your original blueprints. And this ends up reawakening you to your own potential. And, the potential was there already, but it's usually kind of dormant, and people, maybe they don't have the awareness of it, that potential within themselves, or they might know it, but they might think, oh, that's not really a gift. Everybody's like that. There's a sort of a self-talk that kind of starts to change after they've had a life activation. So for me, for example, when I had my life activation done, I started having all these little subtle shifts in self-awareness. It started, and it wasn't about any teachings. It was just, I had this modality, I received it. It's like an 1.5-hour session, and I got a little bit of information out of it. So mostly you're just receiving, and then a little bit of a reading, and that was super accurate. But then I just went home and noticed, what started happening. And it wasn't about what I experienced in the moment, but it was about what started happening afterwards. And these like awarenesses of, maybe that habit and that way I do my day, like how much TV I was watching or what kind of food I was eating, things that, I just thought, well, maybe that's not in my highest good. Maybe I could do something differently. What would that be? And then immediately, like, new ideas and intuitions would start coming through much more clearly than they had before. And I would start making those little shifts and realize, like, oh, I like that, felt good. Yeah, that worked. And then, so I found that over the course of about 4 months, I made all these little incremental changes that actually by 4 months down the line added up to a really big change in my quality of life on a day-to-day basis.
Wow.
And then, as I said, it also helped turn on the awareness within me of my purpose and my direction in life. Didn't necessarily mean I knew how to do it right away, but I knew at least what direction to go. And that really like freed me to, oh, okay, that means I don't need to do it that way. I don't need to fit in that box. I can do it this way. I can do it differently, and it's okay. So yeah, it's an amazing modality that I find just wherever we've been kind of stuck, the energy starts to flow, and it starts creating new movement in our life and awakening greater potentials. And then it's an intuitive process from there to take the steps that align for you.
We're going to link out everything to this activation. Is this should it be done in person with a practitioner?
It has to be done in person, yeah. Because if you want something to have a direct impact on the physical, you got to do it in the physical. Things on the astral might affect you at the astral level, but they're not necessarily going to come and have that direct effect on the physical. So everything we do in the Modern Mystery School tradition is always done in person. And the life activation is a first step. There's so many other tools and modalities, initiations, training, that if somebody felt called to it, they could pursue further steps with it. And it can really accelerate. Like I found that when I got initiated, it really accelerated my growth in a big way. And so that's, I definitely recommend that.
My
at
cheeks are hurting
least
from
a life
smiling
activation.
so much at this. Like, yes, I want it. I want it.
Yeah.
So for people who are, skeptic about these types of things, here you are blending science with the spiritual aspect of it. Is there something daily until they get to the yes on activation? Is there some practice? What did it look like for you until you said yes? Is there a practice that they can instill every single day to engage with transformation?
So even if they just start with something simple like deep breathing and focused attention for 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, just to, breathe deep into the belly, like, pull it below the navel and breathe in and breathe out and imagine light coming in with every breath. And as you breathe out, you're just letting go of stress or distraction or fatigue or whatever it is that's bothering you. And just keep doing that. And, 5 minutes of breathing like that. Breathe in through the nose, breathe out through the mouth. And if you extend the out breath to be like twice as long as the in breath, you're also stimulating the vagus nerve.
Yeah.
And that will help, kind of create a relaxation response in the body so that it can de-stress and go into more of a parasympathetic kind of process where it can rebalance. And for us, basic meditation steps, regardless of which style of meditation you do, they all should have about the same steps. There's relaxing the body, right? So just like, work body part by body part and just imagine it relaxing, tell it to relax, right? Move through the body parts and let them relax. Then there's the proper breathing. Then there's, visualizing like light coming into the body.
Yeah.
And then these would move you towards what is called a passive meditation, where you can just sit in that zone of quietness and stillness, for maybe 5 to 10 minutes. It might take you, 15 to 20 minutes to get to that point. If you really want to get into a deeper, what we call a theta brainwave state, where you're really, once you can hit that theta brainwave state, your body will go into a natural healing process. They call it the trophotropic healing state. And then from that stillness place, then you can maybe ask some questions or contemplate something and work with an affirmation or a mantra or do some visualization of, guided imagery, whatever it may be, what we call the active meditation part. Whichever style, whichever, technique of meditation, they're almost always going to have those same 4 steps if you're going to get the most out of the meditation. So I think that's a place to start. And then when they're ready for something deeper, it's about, okay, now how do we take steps of progression? How do I progress in my life, not just calm my mind down?
Absolutely. And having done sessions like that, it feels like a vacation. It feels like, you're plugging back into source energy and peace and everything that matters. And it's all done within you. You are the healer in the end, right?
Yeah. And it brings you just into, that inner peace, right?
Yeah.
Inner peace and inner joy are the most important things, I think, to be pursuing. And then purpose, right? How can I now that I'm cultivating that inner peace and joy within myself, how can I help bring that to the world?
I love that.
Yeah.
You're cultivating the environment not only for yourself to heal, but you're awakening your purpose so that you can take it out into the world.
Yes.
Goosebumps.
Yeah.
That felt like 20 minutes for me. So where can our listeners learn more about your workshops and your teachings and everything that you're doing to blend science and spirituality?
Yeah. So I would have 2 websites maybe to send them to. For the quantum mindset stuff is to go to quantumlearningacademy.co. Not .com, but .co.
Yeah.
And we've got an iQuantum workshop coming up in Reno in end of April. So that's something that I would say it's a 3-day event that would be a great place for people to start. There's no prior steps needed. There's no prior knowledge needed. There's no like, oh, do I have to be good at science? No. It's just really learning like the core principles of what is a quantum mindset? How do we start awakening to that? What are some tools we can use to really access that? We're very excited about it. It's definitely,
Amazing.
Bringing in a new paradigm kind of way of working with meditation, but really understanding who we are as a quantum being. So that's one. And then for sort of a broader scope of the work I do with the mystery teachings and activations and so forth, they can go to theresabullard.com. which is my personal website.
We'll link everything out. I want to know more about that retreat. That sounds amazing. Some quick rapid fire questions in closing. What are the most common mistakes or misconceptions that you're seeing women make with their health?
Okay, two things. One, I think that women have a tendency to think I can do it all.
Yeah.
And yes, you can, but are you overloading yourself, overstressing? Do you need to do it all?
Yeah.
Right? Or can you just allow yourself to be, supported by others, and so that, I'm going to be the strong woman who's very independent and needs nobody. That I think is a mindset that doesn't serve us. It might make you strong, and that's great, but then we got to move beyond that from independence to interdependence.
Yeah, beautiful.
Right? Co-creation. And then two, I think you mentioned it earlier, that kind of mindset of our modern day to look for the quick fix. What's the, give me the magic bullet to fix my problem so that I can just move beyond it without really having to do the work. That's a big mistake.
Do you think of that as hormones right now?
Well, yeah.
Identical hormones. I just feel like it's something else that women are just hoping, oh, well, this is it. This is the thing. This is what I've always needed instead of everything. I'll have you back on to talk about that. What's one way that women are making healing and health too complicated?
Yeah, I think the key is when we start to really look at who am I and what works for my being and my system, right? You really have to come to know thyself and find what works for you versus, ideologically, I have to do it this way, or that's the key, or, this system versus that system. Like there's so many fad diets and systems out there, and they might work, for certain people, but there's no one size fits all. And they're not going to work across the board. And I think that it's a real trap when we get into thinking it has to be this way because of some philosophy or ideology, and then that gets imposed upon, like, it's got to all be raw food, or it's all got to all be vegan, or it's got to all be paleo, or it's got to all be, carnivore, these kinds of, this is just an example. So we complicate things in that way because there's so many different, like, this is the way, that then it becomes really confusing around which way am I supposed to do it, right? So when we think supposed to, that's where we get into trouble. And it's like, no, what actually works for my body?
And feels really good, right? So it feels good. All right. What are 3 things that we can start doing right now to optimize our health? From your lens.
For sure, breathe better.
Breathe better.
Do some meditation so you can de-stress, right? And even 5 minutes a day, every day, within just within just 2 weeks, it's already going to start to rewire things in your system. And then I would say find your purpose.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And if you could leave our listeners with just one takeaway that you're most passionate about right now, what would it be?
My most passionate thing right now is how important it is for us to shift from this old Newtonian mindset into a quantum mindset. And
Amen.
Yeah, we're at such a critical time in our transforming world. And I really have experienced that the quantum mindset is where we're going to really thrive and be able to help steer the course in a better way and understand, I think, deeper principles that can underlie a whole new framework for life, both within our personal lives and socially, societally. Like if we can start applying these quantum principles as we build a new way of life and a new paradigm world, that's where the future's at.
I couldn't agree more. I'm excited to chase you there. I feel like my greatest healing has always come when I'm almost unapologetically giving myself radical permission to just play my note. Right? And just own that frequency, but I often forget. I get stuck in the trap of being busy. So thank you for shedding light on that today.
Thank you.
And the fact that it's such an important part of healing. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you, Mona.